Right, we are recording back for another podcast here. This is podcast number 10. We are officially into double digits. Today, we are going to be talking about long term athletic development and how SSP goes about kind of prepping some of our younger athletes to hopefully have a lot of success, once they get their high school careers. My name is Joe Service. Alex Loosebrock over there, as always. We are excited to get back on it. We were just talking before we hit the record button how it's been a couple weeks since we jumped on. So that we are back. We got an important topic, I think, especially now the last 3 or 4 weeks. If you pay attention to Major League Baseball, tons and tons and tons of talk around protecting pitchers' elbows, right? And what are the kind of things that are affecting pitchers, and why are their elbows blowing up, for lack of a better term? Why are we seeing so many Tommy John surgeries? And this isn't a direct response to that, but it kind of got us thinking, because there has been a lot of talk about what is happening in, obviously what we see is Major League Baseball, but what is happening in like youth sports and youth development, and some of the things that might be happening to cause some of these things, and what isn't maybe happening in the youth development, and how we can kind of try to fix it. I don't know if anyone's got one answer to fix everything, but that's kind of something that's on everybody's mind right now, right?
Yeah. And like this isn't like one of those like sexy topics like speed training or kind of some of the other ones that we run with sometimes. This is one that really the basis of long-term athletic development is having the long-term outlook and starting from school, square one, and working from square one to square two and so on and so forth, and working up the ladder than trying to just jump a bunch of different phases, right? And it takes a long time, right? And for some people it takes longer, some people it doesn't take quite as long, right? But to get to the goals that people have and want to achieve, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort, and it's not just 3 months or 6 months or a year even of effort, right? It's years, it could be up to a decade, if not longer than a decade, especially with some of the pro guys that we have. They're, I don't know how old Aaron Bummer is, right? But he's probably been doing, stuff for long-term athletic development for well over a decade at this point. And, he's still trying to continue developing from an athletic standpoint, right? And it's not a sexy component because it takes so much time, right? There's no one quick fix to get to that, next tier, right? It's not like, hey, you do this, you're going to throw 95 and you're going to be healthy as ever, right? If you have that, you'll be the richest person in the entire world because everyone's going to look for that thing, right? But it's impossible for that to be the case, right? There's no one specific thing like, oh, if you do this drill every single
Right.
day the rest of your life, you're gonna, you know, throw 95 and never have an injury, right? There's so many different factors and
Well,
components that
that's what I
go
was
into
just
all of it.
so I have notes. I didn't write this down on my notes, but I think you bring up a good point, and it kind of dovetails nicely with one of the previous pod. Don't know what number it was, but when we were talking about, are you outcome oriented or like process oriented? And again, in my statements like that, it makes me think some athletes are looking for magic bullets, and some athletes are looking for a process or kind of a plan to be put together, steps that they can follow to ultimately achieve their successes or achieve their goals, right? And this is kind of like that, right? Because if you are in our position and we have a 10-year-old thrown into our lap, and the parents are interested in doing some sort of training, or it doesn't have to be an age, I guess, maybe a untrained individual, an untrained young athlete, we have to put a plan together and kind of ensure that we are following a pattern or a plan that we put together to not only give them some progress in the short term, but put them on to where they're peaking in the long term, right? And again, right in the name, long term athletic development. So it's not just we're going to train for 3 months and then we're never going to train again. It's we're going to train for 8 years if you have a young player. After that, then we're playing into college, right? If that's what we want to do. So let's start. I kind of wrote down a little bit of a definition. It'll give us a little bit of a jumping off point, I think. So like in my brain, kind of in the SSP world, long-term athletic development looks something like this, right? Or we define it as like a focus on coordination, rhythm, flexibility, joint stability, mobility, and movement quality. And then once a certain level of movement quality is gained by that athlete, I wrote down movement capacity a little further down the road, right? So there's like a bunch of kind of fancy sounding words to basically say we want athletes. Our main goal when we see young athletes is to increase athleticism, right? And to make sure that once certain amounts of athleticism are achieved, they have the ability to repeat those athletic movements like over and over and over and over again, right? So if you want to boil it down to its most kind of simple terms, that's how I see long-term athletic development, right? And sometimes the process of gaining those qualities can take, like we were talking about, years. So that's really the basis, I would say, of where we start with our guys, our youth athletes when they come in. And I guess last thing, and then I'll flip it back over to you, is like when we talk about movement quality, yeah, we're talking about sprinting form and jump technique and landing technique and all that stuff. But the big kind of movements in our brains are pushes, pulls, squats, hinges, right? Can the athlete hinge properly? Can they squat properly? Can they execute, whether it's an upper body pull or a lower body pull, if you want to start to dive down those rabbit holes, and then upper body pushes, lower body pushes, right? So basic compound movements and progressing from there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And there's so many different routes that my brain kind of went through, when you were talking about those different things. And one of the big ones is, yeah, this is just touching to the latest point that you made. Yeah, we are teaching athletes how to squat. We're teaching athletes how to hinge. We're teaching athletes how to vertical push, vertical pull,
right?
Horizontal push, horizontal pull, lunge. There's a bunch of different nuances that we use as well, right? But the basic movements are the squat, hinge, push, and pull. But there's a bunch of different roads that we can go down with it, right? And we do that we're not here to mimic like a bunch. We're not here to mimic like exact movements from their training competition, whether that's, in the specific world of like baseball, right? With swinging and throwing, with stuff, or like fielding a ground ball even, right? Or catching a fly ball, right? We're not working on those specific athletic qualities in here, but learning how to hinge, learning how to squat properly, learning how to push and pull properly, all carry over by creating a resilient athlete that can compensate and do that type of stuff without having to worry about, I'm getting into a bad position. I'm not, my body's not going to be able to withstand this. I'm not going to be able to come out of this healthy, right? They're not consciously thinking about it, but like their brain will subconsciously be like, yo, we're in kind of a bad spot right now, right? We need to be able to get out of it, and that could be, quick, on a button type moment, right? But one quote that I heard, I can't even tell you how long ago, it was the best athletes in the world are the best compensators, right? And why they're the best compensators is because they're able to self-organize in ways that are beneficial for the movement that they're trying to produce. And by doing the stuff that we do here, by doing the basics right and just hammering that over and over and over again, and then eventually after we get those movement qualities done and we're increasing capacity, right, then we're able to really, really see a lot of progress on a crazy level with guys because they're able to squat properly
Sprint,
and get
jump,
into positions that are beneficial for when they sprint, jump, run. They're able to hinge properly for when they need to get into a hinge when they go down the mound, when they throw, when they run. Hinging is a big, big thing with running, right? And then with pushing and pulling that, yeah, and with that push and pull movement with the upper body, what do you think actually protects the elbow of guys, right? It's their ability to withstand force. And the only way they're able to withstand force is with strong muscles, ligaments, tendons, and bone structures all within that, joint, whether that's the elbow or the shoulder or in their back or hip or knee or ankle or whatever it may be, right?
The quote
Their
that
ability
I
to
thought you were going to go
do
to, and
these things at a
I
high
just
level is
attribute it to
directly
Eric
and
Cressy. It
for a
could be
long
he probably
time
heard it from someone
is
else too,
directly
but I think
dependent on
baseball
the
players are
body's
the best
ability to
compensators.
withstand
That's
those
the one that
forces over a
always
long period of time.
resonated with me because, like, we'll see when we get athletes that are maybe a little more set in their movement patterning, older athletes, okay, maybe ones who have trained in the past but maybe haven't trained quote unquote properly in our eyes, okay, or guys who are untrained. Talk about like the self-organization and things like that. Like they've just figured out ways to do stuff, right? And so if it's not the most biomechanically sound movement patterning or something like that, they've just figured it out, right? And if something hurts, then they probably just made a little adjustment on their own to try to get out of that little bit of a pain threshold that they were feeling, right? So I think throughout history, with the nature of baseball and the nature of throwing a baseball and swinging a bat, players have always just found things that have worked for them, whether it's again the highest movement quality or not. So the thing I back in our youth athletes is that if they are showing us some discrepancy in movement, right? If they are showing us that they're already compensating as a 10-year-old or something like that, hopefully we can adjust if we need to. Okay, every athlete's different. Some athletes, that might just be the way they are, the way they're built, the way their bone structure is. Maybe there isn't anything we can do, but hopefully we can get them back closer to maybe a neutral movement pattern in, say, a squat or something like that, and then we can alleviate some of the need to compensate down the road, right? Just because they're going to be they're foundationally built on those quality movement patterns, as opposed to, you know, faulty movement patterns, or, you know, the old kind of way of saying, like, you don't want to shoot a cannon from a boat, right? You got to build that foundation strong. You don't want to build your house on quicksand because there's nothing there to kind of stabilize it. So those are the things I like when we get some of the younger athletes. Our training might be a little bit more kind of generalized, and it might be more, again, GPP, general physical preparedness type stuff with some of our younger guys. But I think that sets them up to get more complex as they get older and as they need more complexity, right? So I think that's a big thing. And that kind of a good jumping off point, it brings me to this next thought, is like, I think it's really easy for trainers in our space to say, you know, or coaches in our space who maybe don't exactly know. Maybe they see something floating around on the internet like, this is how Bryce Harper trained in the off season. Or they'll see something floating around. I know we've had conversations with some of our athletes like, this is Ole Miss's off-season training program. I need to run exactly what Ole Miss ran because they were in the College World Series last year or something like that. And so we try to take these high-level athletes that may have, years and years and years and years of training under their belt, and then all of a sudden a coach or a parent who isn't doing this with bad intentions, they just might not know, is trying to take those programs that they see these high-level athletes utilizing, and they try to have their 10U baseball team execute the same thing. Or they're even, 13, 14. You even see this with some high school kids. It's like every single stage of development, these athletes, well, individually, the athletes are all at different stages of development, right? And so trying to take a blanket program that maybe you found on the internet or you saw on Instagram that some really high performer was utilizing, and put that onto a group of athletes that might not be ready for it, is really kind of a recipe for disaster, right? And it's where people like us come in, because we need to get the athlete to the point where they can execute something that even resembles that. Because again, throwing a Bryce Harper routine onto a 15-year-old untrained freshman or sophomore in high school is a recipe for disaster, right? And so understanding that there is a process to get there, and I'm not going to sit here and critique Ole Miss's training program or Bryce Harper's training program or insert whatever high level you want to. I can only tell you the athlete that I see in front of me, what is going to fit for him. And that's kind of where our magic is made, right? Is that ability to individualize for that kid, or for that maybe small group of athletes or something like that. So I think that's huge. And it's just so easy to pull stuff off the internet now. And that's kind of where some people get themselves into trouble.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And like if you were to like look at that Ole Miss or Bryce Harper's training program, I guarantee you can categorize, like if he has a leg day that he's doing, you can categorize the main compound lifts into the exact categories that we train athletes in all the time here, in a squat and a hinge, right? And for upper body movements, in a push and a pull, right? And when you do have, I'll even go as far as like a 16-year-old, right? If we have a 16-year-old or 17-year-old athlete that's only been going for a year or 2 years, and they come in and they're like, "Hey, I see on Instagram Ole Miss is doing this with their guys. I want to do that." Well, little Johnny, right? We'll get there, right? But a lot of the training philosophies that they use is just progressions upon what we need to start you with, and progressions of where we're at right now within our training program is just more like the big things. I even wrote this down earlier. When we use our athletes, we teach them how to squat, and we teach them how to hinge, we teach them how to push, and we teach them how to pull. And then to progress it, we add, multi-planar movements or components to it, right? So moving, both in the frontal and sagittal, and then what's the last one? I can't quite remember. Transverse. There we go. I always get temporal with the brain mixed up. Yeah, but with the transverse plane, right? And then after we do that, we change how the load is distributed, right? Whether that's, for a squat, if it's a goblet, or if it's, a bar and a landmine, or if it's a back loaded or front loaded or safety bar or whatever it may be, right? And then once we get even past there, right, depending on the time of the year, we'll change the focus of the component, right? Whether that's strength, speed, speed, pure power, whatever it may be. When you really do break down, though, these guys' programs, they all follow a very, very similar template to what we probably run in here, right? I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know what Ole Miss is running. I can have a general idea of what Ole Miss is running with their baseball program, or what Tennessee or, any of these big programs. I have a general idea what they're running with their guys, but I don't know right off the top of my head. But I do know with pretty high certainty that a lot of what we run in here is either progressions or regressions of what they're running with their guys, right? And it's all dependent on the guys, right? So like if we have our 12-year-old, little Timmy, and we have Jake Myers, right? The basis of their programs are going to be very, very similar. We're going to squat, we're going to hinge, we're going to push, we're going to pull, we'll probably carry, we'll lunge, I went over that stuff a little bit more too, right? And we'll do mobility and stuff like that. But what we're going to run with a Jake Myers is going to be different in the load, the way in which we load, and the goal at which we're trying to achieve with that, right? And it's all dependent on the time of the year, right? Caveat, asterisk to it, right? But, there's, so much benefit and so much importance that we need to put on movement quality here, because, when people compensate, especially younger athletes, if they're compensating in a bad or in a good way, right? And you want to allow them to compensate in good ways over and over and over again, right? You want to flush out the bad as much as possible, because that's usually what puts them at the highest risk of injury. That's when it takes away from their actual athletic performance within that movement, and we're able to really influence it when they are at an early training age, and when they are at an early chronological age as well, for their, distant success, right? But as soon as we get a 22-year-old, like what you were talking about, that's been doing the same stuff for the last X amount of years, and maybe it's beneficial, maybe it's not, and then they compensate in a negative way, it's a lot harder
I have
to
a great
break that
example
pattern
of this
because they
that's
had
going to make you
just spent the
laugh.
last
Sorry to cut you off.
17
So
years
just
of their life
like,
doing the
okay,
same thing over and over and
the
over
weather's
again
getting
from a
nice
throwing
here, right?
standpoint.
And
You know, when they were 5, they
we
threw
like to play
like this,
golf
and then they
when we have
progressed,
some
and then
free
they
time.
progressed, but there was never
Perfect
really
example is
any
me and my
intervention
golf swing.
that
It's kind of broken.
allows
It's going to
for
be really
positive
hard for me to fix
compensation,
my golf swing,
right?
okay? Because I've been
And that's
swinging
where we're
like that for so many years, right? So we can have all the conversations. I can
you're fine.
understand what I'm supposed to be doing, but when it's time to actually swing the golf club and hit the ball, I revert back into my old ways just because that's so ingrained in my head. And like, that's not, that's not like breaking news or anything, but this here in like compensation patterns and all that stuff, right? Like people like ask like who's the best athlete to work with, or like what would you, if you had an athlete walk in the door for his first day of training, like what would that kind of perfect scenario look like? And a lot of times the perfect scenario for me at least, and I think I can lump you into this category too and kind of speak for you, is an athlete who's never trained before, right? An athlete who has zero training age is our perfect client because we understand that we're not going to have to take 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks to kind of break bad habits, bad movement patterns. We're not going to have to dive that deep into compensation patterns because they don't know any better, right? So right from the jump, we can make sure that we're instilling all these qualities that we've kind of been talking about. You want to get those again? Yeah. Oh, I just waved my arm. Did you get it or did I get it there? Okay, so we can just instill all of the movement qualities that we know are so important right from the jump. And again, we don't have to take all this time
Yeah.
kind of
All these
backtracking
qualities we've
and
been
then
talking about.
relaying that foundation. So sometimes the most difficult ones to get up to speed are the guys who might 5 or 6 years of training under their belt, if that training, I guess, is been improper, or if we feel like it has created some bad habits with them, right?
Yeah, the power of social media and the power of an ego too, right? Like, you know, a lot of times people see, you know, oh yeah. Sometimes people see C-Bum doing this leg day, and they're like, "We're gonna do C-Bum's leg day," and it's like, you shouldn't do C-Bum's leg day. Like, what are we really trying to do here? Like, or like that's the one that grinds my gear the most. Or the other thing is like an ego thing, right? Like in here we want to flush out ego lifting as much as possible. I can't stand it because you're gonna, you know, we've talked about compensation so much in this podcast already, but you are gonna compensate in some pretty bad ways if you ego lift, right? Like the most glaring one is with deadlifting, right? Because you can, I mean, if you ego lift a squat, right, like we're able to see depth and stuff like that, or you're just gonna fail, right? And but with a deadlift, dude, like you're putting your spine at a possible pretty big risk of, you know, injury, right? With either a disc or a vertebrae or with any musculature that's surrounding that area if you ego lift in a negative way. You know, we always teach like bracing of the spine and stuff like that when we're doing that big compound lifts, especially when you're doing like heavier weights. And sometimes if we have a kid in here and, you know, he might not be as strong as some of his other buddies or other people in here, and he's like, I really want to
like a
prove
dog taking
myself,
a
right?
shit.
And then all of a sudden he puts too much weight on the bar,
To be
and you're
blunt,
watching him deadlift, and you see him do one rep, and you're like, okay, there's a little bit of bend in the back there, right? Like let's see, like let's
I
see
don't know.
what
I
the
guess we
second rep
haven't
looks like.
really
All of a
decided. Are
sudden
we gonna
gets to
what
the
kind of
second rep, and all
what
of a
our
sudden
rules
his
are with swearing? That might be a
thoracic spine
first.
just shoots straight up, his hips go right underneath him, and he's just pulling straight with his
I
spine.
don't think we need
And
to
it's like,
beat that.
whoa, stop. Yeah, exactly. We're gonna have to figure out how to put the little beeper in this thing, right? Yeah, we don't yeah we yeah that well I mean I've said crap, but I don't know if crap's a bad word or not.
Yeah,
Um, but
don't say them. Yeah,
like it is, you know, like you were saying, right? It's hard to break
yeah,
patterns, you know, negative patterns over a certain amount of time, right? Especially if, you know, guys come in and they have been training for X amount of years, but they've been training improperly, whether that's on their own or
yeah.
whether
That's new.
that's under the guidance of whoever, right? Like I don't have any names that come to mind. Even if I did, I won't say them, right? But but I like it could literally be anyone, It could literally be, just themselves or stuff like that. And then they create bad patterns, and it's tough to break those bad patterns. And then the social media, aspect of it really does create issues in here sometimes, because kids want to look a certain way, or they want to do things that they see other people do. And it's like, hey man, like, you're not ready for this, right? We need to get you to that level. We need to have a long-term outlook here. Like, there's a reason why we don't run like a triphasic model with guys, right? Or with a lot of athletes in here. We'll run it with
Right.
some of our college guys. We'll run it maybe with
Mm-hmm.
some pro guys or whoever it is, right? But triphasic takes a while. It's a lot of stress on the system. It
Right.
is, you know, it's a very complex thing to do overall.
So
And
that
it's
yes,
takes,
that makes me
if
think
we were to
of
just throw
two
a
sayings,
triphasic
right?
model in with some of
First
our
saying,
16-year-olds, would it
well,
work?
actually three.
Probably,
Don't
right?
burn the
Like,
steak.
we could probably
Okay.
teach them how to do it in enough time,
It's weird to
right?
refer to
But
athletes
we
as steaks,
are
but like we're
skipping
not
so
looking to
many
like
different
just sear the
phases
steak,
that could be
get a
just
3 month
as
bump, and
beneficial
then never
for
sear them
them at
again,
that
right?
point, and then
That
utilize
that
something
isn't
like
what
that
we
later
want.
on in
That's
their
not what's in
training
their
career.
best interest, right? Also, don't fire all the bullets out of your gun. Meaning, like, we don't need to use those advanced techniques when basic general principles of strength and conditioning are going to get us the results we need, right? Again, let's go back and focus on like very young population here. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds even, right? Untrained or very low training age. Okay, so let's say something as complex and in depth as like a triphasic model of training is the last bullet in the chamber of your gun, right? You got 6 bullets. Well, I'm not going to use that one, or I'm not going to use all 6 of those bullets right away when I know that goblet
Mhm.
squatting, max effort sprinting, refining hinge patterning, low level vertical and horizontal pressing, and low level vertical and horizontal pulling are going to reap the benefits that I want to see as a coach, parents want to see, and the athletes want to see, right? So that's kind of our lowest level of, at least as far as strength stuff goes. That's kind of what we're focusing on, right? So like, why would we want to put an athlete who is continuing to progress with the basics onto something that is as complex and as in depth as triphasic? You wouldn't. Maybe 10 years down the road, that's what they're going to need, because that basic model that we kind of laid out is no longer yielding results. But that's how we work it, right? We're going to use the stuff that is going to continue to, let me back up. We are going to use the most basic modes of training with our athletes as long as they are still yielding results, right? Once that basic model is no longer yielding results, then it's time to change the model slightly and maybe up the ante, or go for, maybe we have to put some more volume onto that athlete, or the intensity needs to be raised or something like that. And then we just kind of keep stepping up the model as the athlete needs it. So it's like, yes, if we wanted to get crazy and run some, I don't know, German volume training or something with some of our guys, like some of the young athletes, we would probably burn the steak. First of all, we would cook them, right? They wouldn't feel like going to play their sport anymore. We might hurt them, whatever. But maybe we would see results, but it's completely unnecessary, right? Because we can tax them much less and still see great results, if that makes sense, right? Hopefully it does for people that are listening. So,
Oh yeah, and what we're really going for, especially at these younger ages, we're not going to get a kid's deadlift up to 315 pounds at like to the top 99% or whatever. We're not going to get some crazy strength gains, right? We'll get strength gains overall and like over the extended period of time, right? If we have 2-3 years with a guy or a girl, we will have some crazy strength gains over that time, right? But we're the first X amount of months, first few months of training is you're developing a neuromuscular ability more than actual strength. And so if we're like pressing or pulling or working on hinging or squatting, we will they're probably stronger than what they can do for a weight, but they don't know how to do it. They
right.
don't know how to get in the right positions or control the positions or anything like that. So we need to teach them how to do it. And then after they show that they can do it, then all of a sudden, like you're saying, we can progress some volume onto it, or we can up the intensity a little bit, or we can change how we load it a little bit, or stuff like that. We can't just jump from 0 to 100, right? We can have a kid that's 13 years old, and when they do a dumbbell bench press, they're using the 15s in each hand, but they can do 20 push-ups. And it's like, okay, you're bench pressing 30 total pounds, but you can do 20 push-ups, right? The strength numbers don't really equate. Well, we need to increase it's an isolated compound movement is how I like to explain it, like a single arm bench press, like you're isolating the singular arm during
Well,
it, and we got to increase their ability to do that. And
and that's the
that's
goal.
why
I don't
we need to
care
work from
when
point
we
A to
see
point B to point C to D, right?
11,
We can't just
12
go
year
from
old
A to
kid in
T
here.
with
They
kids
might
that
be
age,
really
because
concerned with
we're
load
not
move
going to
on
see
a
a
deadlift, for example,
giant
again. But
change in
really,
what we're going to get.
in my
We're
brain,
going to see
that's
incremental
pretty
increases if
low
we
on the
just do
list, because I
point A
know
to
if
point
we
B,
do those
point
other
B to
things
point
right,
C.
it'll take care of
And
itself.
we're going to mitigate a lot of our injury risk
We
too.
see that happen. We have plenty of examples of, so when we have the athletes, when we make them their workout programs, it goes in a folder, right? And these folders get pretty thick after the athletes have been coming in for 3 or 4 years, right? Consistently. So it's one of the funnest things to do, is to kind of have, like, every once in a while we'll be joking around and they'll flip back to, like, hey, this is what you were doing when you started, right? And it's a concerted effort for us to put that point A in on their cards and work all the way to, maybe they've been in for 4 or 5 years and we're at that kind of point T way down the alphabet, right? So we've taken all these steps and they look back and it's hilarious, because it's like, man, I weighed 120 pounds. I was moving 95 pounds on my trap bar deadlift. And all of a sudden, sitting here in front of us, we have a 6'2", 190-pound senior in high school who's now capable of moving 450 pounds on his trap bar deadlift. And it's really fun to see that development process. And those are the times where I'm like, yes, that is how it's supposed to work, right? 4 or 5 years, consistent training 2 to 3 times a week, whether they're in season or out of season, whether they're playing another sport or not. We make the proper adjustments for all those variables, but that is how it works. It wasn't they put on 200 pounds on their deadlift total in, again, a 3-month period, right? Because that's not what I want to see. And if you see that in an athlete, to me, they're either an extreme outlier or we screwed the process up somewhere, right? Like, as far as we might have taken some jumps that were not needed, or we skipped a few of those points on the journey to get them all of a sudden to where they're lifting that much more, right? Again, that's not the overall kind of goal of those early months / years of development. It's all those other qualities we talked about. It's athleticism, it's rhythm, it's coordination, it's stability, it's mobility, strength, and then working movements, and then work capacity kind of further down the line a little bit with the capacity piece. So yeah, it's easy to want to get really excited, and the athletes, when they come in to start, are really excited and they just want to go, but sometimes we got to kind of rein them back in a little bit and try to explain this process like we're kind of doing in this forum here. So I wanted to, unless do you have anything else to put add on to that? Mm-hmm.
Let me see my notes. I mean, just to add another phrase, right? Like, everything takes time. It's a tortoise, not a hare. We're not at a full out sprint with all this stuff, right? It's a long-term deal. And if you really do want to see the fruits of your labor really happen, right? You can't just be inconsistent. You can't just, jump in and expect to do the most complex things in the world right away. You need to sprint as fast as you can, with just your body weight. You got to sprint with heavy loads as fast as you can, sprint with light loads as fast as you can. You need to jump in all directions. You need to change direction. You need to, lift in multiple directions. You need to do the simple things right. You need to, really, at the end of the day, our job is, but it's not, right? It's like one of those things where it's like, even we go back to that golf thing, right? Hitting a golf ball is simple, right? You have a golf club, you have a ball, you hit the ball with the golf club, right? But to get the result that you're trying to get to, you need to swing a golf club a certain way. You need to hit the ball a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same. Oh, that was a fast turn back on. And but it's the same thing in here, right? Like, we need to do things a certain way. We need to follow processes that we've put in place, that you've started with the foundation here, right? We can't just skip
Right.
and go
Yep.
straight to an outcome. We have to really take our time and hammer the basics, do the basics at an elite level. And after we do the basics at an elite level, continue to do the basics at an elite level. And then we'll add different components into it, whether that is, level Y and it's triphasic, right? Or maybe it's level A and we're goblet squatting with heels elevated for 8 reps each side with a 20-pound dumbbell, right? We got to find ways to manipulate the curve for each athlete. And everyone thinks that it's some crazy thing for their kid, right? Or for their, player that, and their coach. Everyone thinks it's always such a crazy thing. It's not. If you do the basics right, like we could probably do, a sprint, jump, squat, hinge, push, pull, carry with every single athlete over a year period, and we're going to yield really good results, almost regardless of
Yeah, if
training
anyone wants to
age,
help with my golf swing,
right?
go ahead and drop me an
Because
email at
those are things that
sports.com.
actually improve athletic quality, improve the athlete's
I would
ability
love
to
to.
compensate and withstand those compensations. And it's a lot
Okay, so
simpler
I
than
want to
what it
kind of switch
is, than what it
gears a
looks
little
like,
bit, and let's
right?
talk a little bit
And it's
in this
our
next
job
part
as strength
about,
coaches to be able to
in my
make
opinion,
kind of the
maybe,
complex
and we don't
things
have
a
to
little
get
bit
like
more simple and for people to
political or anything
understand
like
too.
that, but like why we're seeing parents who have maybe 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds or 12-year-olds coming in,
I've
and
been
they're,
trying, man.
like, hey, we
I've been
understand that,
trying for a while now,
our
and
son or daughter isn't,
it
when we see them on
works
the field, they're not
sometimes,
moving that
but
great, or when we are working in the cages, or when we're doing this, that, or the other thing, we're noticing some things. And I just wanted to kind of point out that I feel like maybe when I started, like 10, 11, 12 years ago or something like that, it wasn't as big of a thing for younger athletes to meet this very basic work that we do with them. And I just wanted to point out that, as time has went on, my perspective is that things like recess are being pulled out of school, PE classes are maybe being limited or not, not required. So you can opt out of them if you want to take a study hall, or you can opt out of them if you want to take another class. And it really kind of goes back to when I was growing up. Those were the places that we learned the simple tasks of skipping, karaoke, gallop. We did as much kind of crap as we give like the presidential fitness test. That was big, and it was like we did the beep test, we did the sit up test, we did a pull up test, we did sit and reach, all of that stuff. And I feel like the more I talk to parents, some of those things are being pulled kind of the day to day lives of kids, and you couple things like that with the increased time, the prevalence of every kid has a phone now from the time they're like 10 years old on. So we're increasing kind of our sit time, our screen time. We're decreasing that might be taking place in like a school setting, and then couple all of that with the increase in gameplay from a young age. And by games I mean like organized sporting events, I guess, and decreasing the amount of like neighborhood play, pickup games, whether it's like basketball, pickup baseball, stickball in the driveway, stickball in the road, in the street. All of that stuff that was kind of a cornerstone of a young athlete's development are kind of being pulled out, and so we don't see as much kind of free play going on with our younger generation coming up. And so that is also a cornerstone, I would say, of kind of the do is try to mimic some of those things. Now, not necessarily playing like stickball or wiffle ball or something like that, but a lot of the drills, when we have a good group of the younger athletes, a lot of the drills that we use are kind of game-based things, tag-based movement drills, jumping, like you said, almost trying to mimic like playground type activity, just because we understand that is going to, if we want to even pull back a notch into kind of that foundational development and not even talk about, squatting and hinging and pushing and pulling, but those kind of game type activities that we're kind of losing societally with our younger generation, it's really cool to inject some of those things back in here and put them into situations that are a little more, free play esque, I guess. And it, you know, I know from what I see working with athletes that are on the younger age of the spectrum, they would much rather play square tag, for example, than have me set up two cones and try to coach them through how to properly execute the 5-10-5 shuttle run, right? They want to be in that kind of competitive, fun environment, and we can offer that to them in a setting that they're thinking they're just playing a game and having fun. Us as coaches are seeing great change of direction, great acceleration work, spatial awareness, ability to cut on a dime, spin, use their mind, and kind of be free flowing in that square tag environment, for example. So I just wanted to kind of maybe spend a minute or two on to how we develop some of our movement stuff. And it's not always for our younger athletes just like sprint in a straight line, but we like to play games, I guess, for lack of a better term, that are going to expose them to all these different motions and movements and things that are going to be really beneficial, but they just think they're having fun playing games, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's like play and stuff with that, like that with the younger population is it's letter A in the alphabet in change of direction work. It's in landing mechanics. It's in, deceleration. It's in acceleration. It's in, name a bunch of different movement qualities that are on the athletic scale rather than, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote, the squatting, hinging, pushing and pulling and stuff like that. The play is really, it's the very foundational level of building that motor and those movement capacities for those kids. And it's like if we were to try to do an A series or the 5-10-5 or an L drill or
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's awesome.
whatever we can pull out for a drill with a 12-year-old kid or a group of 12-year-olds, it's going to be like pulling hair or pulling teeth.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna not look good at all. We're not gonna really have any benefit out of that whatsoever.
Yes.
But all of a sudden we put out 4 cones and we have square tag, we see a lot of really good change of direction. We see a lot of good
Mm-hmm.
lateral and linear movement.
And I
We
think
see a lot
too,
of good
like, especially,
deceleration,
well,
acceleration
this got
mechanics.
to
We see
be
a lot of,
high school athletes
change of
or middle
direction out
school.
of a decel,
It's okay for them
name
to
the
have a little bit of
quality
fun
from an
while they're
athletic
training, right?
standpoint. And
And I think sometimes
it's
we get in the
awesome, right?
mindset of,
And it's,
uh,
I mean,
we got
even
to
with our
grind,
older
we got to,
athletes, we'll take out the
everything has got
spike
to
ball
be
net sometimes when it gets
monotonous, and
warmer
I don't
out.
want to do this, but I'm
And
going to do it because I know it's
that's a lot of fun to see
beneficial,
them do
things
that
like
too,
that. But like
because
injecting some fun
it's
into it,
the
especially with the
same thing.
younger, like the
They're
young kids, like you're
working
saying, like
change of
10, 11,
direction,
12-year olds, like
acceleration,
we want them to
deceleration,
develop a positive
all of those
relationship
qualities
with
in a game.
training, with,
And it's very, very beneficial.
movement, with the ability to cut, juke their buddy out, like all these fun things. Like it's okay for them to develop positive relationships with training. Now, again, we talk about some of the pro athletes that we get to train. It is literally their job, right? It is literally their job. So every day isn't going to be sunshine and rainbows and the most fun, but they know they got to do it because they want to stay as an active professional athlete. So it's like, okay, completely different category. But those younger athletes developing positive relationships with running, with jumping, with change of direction, with strength training, good things, right? Because again, if we really want to zoom back out and even take the athletic portion out of our conversation, like at bare minimum, hopefully we're developing, or hopefully we're instilling like a fun, positive, maybe is a better word than fun, a positive relationship with the athletes that we see, and just like fitness for the rest of their lives, right? Like, again, that's kind of like a little woo woo, and like I don't really like to, think in those kinds of like terms sometimes, but really at the end of the day, they need to enjoy what they're doing in here, and that's going to serve them well for the rest of their lives, whether it's athletically or just them being a good dad or a good mom or a good husband or a good wife, active and involved and able to move for hopefully a long period of time. So yeah, that was a little bit of a tangent. I didn't have that written on my notes, but it seemed to fit right there. Okay, anything else? Because I'll say one last thing and then we can wrap it up. Okay, the kind of the last thing that I just wanted to touch on, and kind of to wrap all this up, is again, when we are seeing and training our younger athletes. Okay, the goal in my brain, and again, I'll speak for you, is not to peak in that next 3 months, right? It's not a, hey, I'm going to train in the off season. I'm going to be the best I've ever been when my season starts and we've peaked, right? Our goal, and this is what we see on the sheets when the athletes come in and do their evals, is usually the goal is to make varsity as a sophomore, to make my freshman team, to play in high school, right? So our goal with the training is to, again, put them on a plan to get them to peak when they are, I just wrote down like later in their high school careers, right? And that timeline might differ athlete to athlete, but again, it's not burning the stake. It's not firing all the bullets out of the gun. It's creating that path to have them peak when, kind of the lights are the brightest and it might mean the most, right? So again, to kind of tie it back into our pitching discussion that we jumped off with, I really don't care how hard an 11-year-old throws, right? I care about how many pitches that 11-year-old threw. I worry, can he go play the field the next day because we didn't just absolutely fry him on the mound to maybe win the 11U championship game, right? Not really high on my priority list. I want that athlete to be healthy. I want them to be able to train for a long time. I want them to play for a long time, to be healthy for a long time. And I think that's sometimes we get caught up in the world where it's like, that 11U tournament is life or death and we need to win that tournament. So we do some things that may not be in the best interest of the athlete at the time. Now he's not going to, or she isn't going to say anything because they want to win as well. But like if we're going to be the adults in the room, sometimes we have to make decisions in that long term that may not be, the most fun in the short term. And the same thing goes for training, right? Like we got plenty of tools at our disposal where we could take them from 0 to 100 in a 2 or 3 month span. But again, that isn't what is going to be most beneficial in the long term. And I think sometimes we just got to zoom out and say, like, we are going to sacrifice some short-term gains, some short-term successes in order to ensure health, longevity, and kind of that we'll keep saying it, long-term athletic development of each individual athlete that we see. And I guess that's kind of a good way to put a bow on kind of the whole conversation and really what the whole conversation is about. Right. 100%. Right. 100%. No, right. Yeah. Consistent. Can you get it? You got your fancy wireless headphones. I'm locked in over here. Yeah. So consistent.
It's climbing a mountain.
Over
it's
a long
not
stretch of time.
Trying
not
to sprint
a huge
to the peak, right?
followed by
a lot of times if you see like a rapid incline,
huge valley.
There's usually a rapid decline that follows, like that, right? And we don't want high peaks and we don't want low valleys. We want the end of it to be the highest peak of it all, right? We don't want it to just drop off at the end.
We went for maybe a little bit longer than I wanted to, but I think we got a lot of good info in there. And guys, thanks for joining us. We'll next pod. Go Jays.
Yes, sir. God bless and go Jays.